Please welcome back to the stage Lieutenant General Martin Steele.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm extremely honored to be back and spend an hour with you this afternoon and have an opportunity to be vulnerable like all of the presenters today and talk a little bit about my story and how I think it's applicable to your initiative and what you're doing in diversity and inclusion at Ohio Health and what this is all about. I have to tell you that in preparation for this, Sue Yablonsky and everyone at Ohio Health here has been so helpful on Dave's staff to help prepare me to come here. I was privileged to be here last November and speak on 2 different occasions to the veterans and a morning breakfast at your fabulous zoo and a luncheon at a smaller group that same day and see the magnificent things that are going on here. Last night, be with Guy Worley to see this fabulous museum, Veterans Museum, that will open on October 27th, that I know that you all will go to, that's way beyond your wildest imaginations of what it's going to do to honor the veterans of America. But for me, in preparation for today, I had an opportunity to see your OLB, all the videos from last May. Sue sent them to me, and I studied them and took pages and pages of notes of every utterance that was made by the principals who stood up on this stage and spoke about their experiences, if you knew me, and everything that they had to say about themselves. The signs that went up, which were profound, that they presented at the end of the day. What happened here today, another several pages of notes that I've taken, and the takeaway, the irony is that I'm the oldest guy in the room, according to Dave. He says he's the second oldest, but I just had the opportunity to celebrate my 72nd birthday just last Saturday. Yeah. I wish my wife were here to hear you clap your hands, but a lot of what I'm going to say, I've got to encourage you to not so personalize it for me as self-aggrandizing, but put it in context of you, just like I have done with everyone who made their vulnerability statement today, as far as I'm concerned. And I would like you to do that on everything that I say in sharing my story. But my wife and I have been married 51 and a half years. We have 3 beautiful children. Yeah. High school sweethearts. And I was the only one in my unit in Vietnam when I went at age 18 and 19 that didn't get a Dear John letter. If you all know what a Dear John letter is. Dear John, I don't love you anymore. I know I love your best friend Bobby down the street. And so the fact that my girlfriend waited for me and we were able to be married the week after I was commissioned as the youngest officer in the Marine Corps at age 20 at Quantico, Virginia, by a Catholic priest who went on to be the Cardinal of New York, John J. O'Connor, who I followed his career, and he followed mine all the way up through being a retired lieutenant general. But our lives were blessed with 3 children, a daughter who lives in Pittsburgh, an educator, profoundly gifted young woman as a child at 10 with autism and a number of other issues that are requiring medical treatment, a son who is a Marine colonel currently living on Okinawa, Japan, who's the commander of a Marine Air Station, who was President Bush 43's pilot on Marine One, the helicopter, for 4 years, a really gifted Marine, a college Division I wrestler, inducted into his Athletic Hall of Fame at George Mason University after only being out of school for less than a year. He was a walk-on and a self-made man that went to the National Wrestling Championships in Iowa, in Ames, Iowa. Just a gifted young man, a triathlete today, 2 kids, 13 and 11. And then we have a 3rd child, daughter, planned, who was born 12 years later and lives down the street from us. And she's the one that says she's going to take care of us when everybody else doesn't care, when we don't know what we're doing anymore. But I mention this as a statement relative to just what happened on Saturday. My son came in from Okinawa, Japan, 10,000 miles away to be at my 72nd birthday. Our daughter came from Pittsburgh to be, and my son didn't know that his older sister was going to be there until I picked him up at the airport and I said, Diane's coming down from Pittsburgh. And he was dumbfounded. I mean, obviously we knew that he was going to be there because he was coming from that far of a distance. But to know that the nuclear family was going to be together for the first time in 20 years, had spouses and grandkids and all that, but never just the five of us together. And we had so much fun, reliving their youth. Nope. Football games, all of the vulnerabilities, everything that was said. I mean, this is my life too, all of these things. Not being there, telling my son, quit playing football, not your first touchdown. You shouldn't be playing football. This is not your sport. And he became a collegiate wrestler, of some renown. Sent him back we were stationed in Korea, and sent him to Minnesota to go to a survival camp for 30 days when he was a junior in high school. And he came back and said, Dad, I can wrestle with anybody. And he walked on at a Division I school with 2 All-Americas and earned a scholarship, captain of the wrestling team, conference champion, and went to the national championships. All really like what you're doing here and what this is all about. So the story for my family and their forgiveness of all of my wrongdoings and absences, we moved 26 times in 34 and a half years in the Marine Corps. We lived in Japan and Korea and Hawaii and throughout the United States. When I was in Hawaii, which is my wife's favorite tour, I was gone 82% of the time. It was during the Clinton administration, and I was the Strategic Policy and Planning Officer for the United States. The Pacific Command is the largest command in the military. It extends from Mongolia to New Zealand, Madagascar to Washington. 44 countries. I traveled 1,200,000 miles in 20 months. India, 11 times. China, 10 times. The Philippines, so many times I can't recall. Korea, Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia. It was a remarkable experience about what you're doing here today. It was a remarkable experience about learning an appreciation for other cultures and who people are and why they think differently than we do. And an understanding that you come in with a certain bias from your upbringing and you think that you may have the solution or the right answer. And then you see the rest of the world, 1,300,000,000 Chinese, 1 billion Indians, the largest Muslim population in the world in Indonesia, 110 million Muslims. And you get to know them, their leadership, their corruption, their wrongdoings, their hopes and their dreams, and their understandings of who America is. Lee Kuan Yew, the founder of Singapore, who's passed away recently, was the most brilliant man I ever met in my life. And I had so many precious moments with him in my life of going to Singapore when we were concerned about a hegemonic China, what they were doing in the world, what we weren't doing in response, what we needed to be doing in response, and what his focus was to me as we got to know one another on such a powerful basis. And it's about what I said this morning with Dave Blum up here, and I'm going to repeat throughout my remarks this afternoon. He looked me in the eye, and we greeted me at every turn, and always said, General, it's the character of your deeds that's going to preserve the world. The character of your deeds. And in particular, he felt, and I say this humbly, not to offend any other military service, but of the United States Marine Corps and your value system: honor, courage, and commitment. The character of your deeds of doing, not talking, of doing honor, courage, and commitment in the world. We don't want your presence here. We don't want you physically here on our territory, but we need your presence in the area. We need your example of leadership. We need you to inspire us to be things that we don't believe we can be, to create security and stability, economic growth, and learn to love and respect one another. And we can do that through the character of your deeds. Powerful impact on me. Powerful impact. And I was going to save this till last, but I'll run out of time and I'll forget it, so I'm going to say it now because I want it to resonate in your head. In Indonesia, the largest Muslim populated country in the world, we were at that time, pre-9/11, trying to come to grips with these radical extremist hate groups that were training throughout the islands of Indonesia. Those of you who know the geography, it is island chains that are wider than the expanse of the contiguous borders of the United States of America. And all of these little islands were pockets of radical extremists that have become what we have today in the world. That's where they were training at the time. And so I was with special operations people that were in partnership with us during the Clinton administration, trying to figure out how we could mitigate that, how that we wouldn't have to be alone and an onerous responsibility to mitigate it, but how we could get the peoples of the region to understand this was not just a threat to Western democracy, this was a global threat because it was hate-filled extremism. And the head of special operations was a Harvard-educated Muslim general officer. As a poignant moment, he wanted to share with me, as a practicing Catholic at the time, what it was all about being Muslim and what faith was in his world. Just as Hindus and Hindis and the doctor speaking about going to Calcutta with Mother Teresa today and having spent so much time in India and studying the Hindu faith, the Buddhist faith in regions of the world, Japan, etc. I just really got into it. My degrees are in history, public administration, the government, international relations, and international security affairs. And so that's my educational background, and that's my thrust of understanding human beings, if you will, think differently. But what he did to me was he brought a Sufi mystic to me, a little blind guy, no eyes, little loincloth, no shirt, rags, didn't weigh 90 pounds soaking wet. And he came out and he said, "This is one of our holy men, General. This is one of our holy men." And what we want to do is just show you that our God and your God and Supreme Being and your faith, our faith, they're so melded together because it's a common bond, not an uncommon bond. So he said, what I'd like to do is, he gave me a coin, and we were in this huge area, about this big, by the way, and he said, you just go anywhere you want to, and you bury this coin, put it out there, put it under a rock, do anything, and then we'll see what happens. And so I looked at him kind of funny, and this little guy in the loincloth, with a little thing on his head, he was just over to the side, looking up like this, can't see anything. And I went over and buried this coin underneath this rock about 150 yards away and came back. So then he said to the mystic, "Find the coin." And the guy walks around a little bit and moves. And so where am I? Where are our men about all this? What we're doing here? Diversity and inclusion, trust, self-reliance, resilience, doubt. I'm thinking somebody's talking into this guy's ear, 3 steps to the left, 50 to the right, turn. And this guy goes over and picks up the rock. So I'm taken by it. I'm captured by the essence of what just happened to me, but where am I? I'm in doubt, man. You've rigged the deal here, baby. You've rigged the deal, and you want me to believe all this stuff. So he's looking at me, and he's no dummy, Harvard-educated guy. He looked at me, and he said, "Okay, General, come over here." And he puts the guy in front of me, and he's about 2 feet from me. He says, "All I want you to do is think of one word. Think of one word. Don't say it, just think of one word. Say the word to yourself over and over. Don't move your lips, General. Just think of one word." This man doesn't speak English, by the way, General. Doesn't speak English. Just think of one word. Think of one word. And I said, "Okay, I will." So I stood there for about 15 seconds and had this mantra about one word in my head. One word in my head. Said it over and over again. Never moved my lips. And then he looked at the mystic and said, "What's the word?" And this little diminutive man, 90 pounds soaking wet with a little thing on, looked up, no eyes, and said, "Watermelon." And that was the word. And it absolutely blew me away. Blew me away. And I looked at the general, and I looked at the mystic and said, "With all of my power and all the abilities that I've been blessed by my God, I'll do everything I can to get us together so we can learn to respect one another and learn to love one another." And I said to him, "Can I hug the mystic?" And he said, "He really doesn't like to be touched." "Can I shake his hand?" And he spoke to him and he said, "General, he wants to hug you." And so I hugged him. Watermelon? Think about it. Think about it. It was a moment for me. It was a moment about the world, who we are. What are we doing here on this planet? What are we trying to do? It was the moment that, at my age at the time, kind of set me on another path in regards to what am I going to do to continue to give back? What am I going to do to try to make a difference in the world? So I said it was going to be one of the last things I said, but I wanted to get your attention about just where I am in my mind about the potential you have here at Ohio Health. Not only amongst your 1,400 people in this room, your associates in the organization, the patients that you have throughout the Ohio Health system, but what you're doing here in these OLBs, what you're doing here in your whole idea of learning to trust one another, communicate with one another, and change your behavior, your personal behavior, how you conduct yourself, with your families, with your loved ones, your business, your work-life balance, and what it will mean not only for the success of Ohio Health, but what it'll mean for your life. I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to an alcoholic father who I never knew, and a mother who's a nurse for 50 years, a remarkable woman, a saint. I have an older brother, 8 years older, a sister 4 years older, and then me. My alcoholic father tried to kill me when I was 2 years old by throwing me out a third-story window of our walk-up in Philadelphia. I had poopy diapers and I was crying, and he was in a drunken rage. And my brother, who's 81, lives in Edmond, Oklahoma. Boomer sooner, boomer sooner. He saved my life. And I have a scar on my head, he has a scar on his head. And my mother left my father. Got an annulment from the Catholic Church. We shortly thereafter moved with a man that became my father, who was a little diminutive man. I have a half-sister by him who's 9 years younger than I am. He was an Army Air Corps pilot in World War II, prisoner of war, Stalag Luft 1 in Barth, Germany. I could talk for an hour about his experiences in war. I'll just cut to the chase. He evaded the Germans for a long time. They almost killed him, beat him to death in the prisoner of war camp. And he never recovered from his post-traumatic stress from his experiences as a POW. Remarkable, resilient man. Life was about survival, He influenced me in many ways, never was abusive to me, but he too was an alcoholic, never abused my mother or any of us, but he was caught up in the trauma of war and man's inhumanity to man. Fayetteville, Arkansas, long way from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, singularly unique in the nation. It's the first integrated community south of the Mason-Dixon line after Brown versus Board of Education in '54. A bastion of racial tolerance in a sea of racism and hatred and bigotry in the United States. We were integrated in 1954, and we were the only community in the area. Northwest Arkansas, from the earliest age, sports, we had African-American ball players, and we were ridiculed, and I had feces and urine thrown on me as a 13-year-old baseball player at the State Legion baseball tournament on the other side of the state because we had black players. Couldn't stay in hotels, had to sleep in barns, box lunches like this everywhere we went. All hate everywhere, filled with hate because we had black athletes. I was a good student athlete in football, baseball, track, and we beat the heck out of everybody we played. But we had to play in Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma. Could barely get a game in Arkansas because of our black athletes. Traumatic experiences. I can't remember really what I had for breakfast this morning, but I can remember those games which I shared with the audience last November as if they took place yesterday. Hung in effigy as the captain of my high school football team, #1 in the state. We had to play the #2 team in the state that was adjacent to us. The town remained nameless, but in 1963, they still hung blacks by the neck until dead if they came into town after sundown in 1963. Showing up, they would hang you. So when we pulled into the parking lot, there was an effigy of me hanging from a tree with my number, 44, hanging from a tree with a big sign, I never used the word, N lover spelled out, with a kid with a KKK hat on and a torch, torching the dummy. We could barely get the black players off the bus to go play. So much hate, hoods, guns, torches. Remember every play. It takes me 10 minutes to tell the story of the football game. I'm not going to do it now. Broke the collarbone of their best player in the first quarter, and the guy played the whole game with a broken collarbone just on hate. I was a running back and a defensive back, and he spit in my face and reaching to crush my privates every tackle he made, just filled with hate and anger. Following spring, 3 African Americans and me ran the mile relay in the state championship. I had the privilege to be the anchor man. I was the only senior. And we broke the state record in Arkansas, which lasted 27 years. We went into a restaurant in Little Rock, our state capital, 180 miles from Fayetteville, and without a coach. And before we could get the water served to us in the restaurant, these 3 great men, the proprietor of the restaurant came over with a .38 caliber pistol, cocked the hammer to the rear, slammed it down my ear canal, blood streaming down the side of my face. Expletives deleted. White boy, if you don't get these blanking out of here, I'm going to blow your blanking head off. And I looked at these 3 men of character, 3 great athletes, magnificent human beings, and said, "You didn't want to eat here anyway, did you?" and we got out of the restaurant. Wayne went on to be the head of the IRS. You could be an all-America, African-American in my high school, but you couldn't be all district or all state because of the color of your skin, and we had them. But the following year, one of those athletes was the first African-American in Arkansas history to be first-team All-State football and in basketball. And the third was a city policeman in my hometown. Flash forward, he, the athlete, became a state policeman on a routine traffic stop outside of Little Rock. A few years later, a white supremacist from Idaho came down to Arkansas to kill a black cop in Arkansas. And when my friend asked him for his driver's license, this white supremacist blew his head off with a 12-gauge shotgun. My classes paid for the education for his wife, paid for the education of his children, and will pay for the education of his grandchildren. I was in town with the African-American policeman just recently in Fayetteville at dinner talking about him, and he said, General, he would have been the head of the highway patrol in the state of Arkansas. He's still revered to this day. I just spoke to 800 young men, high school juniors at Boys State in Arkansas. I do it fairly regularly, but just did it in May. And I was sharing with them, this is in Conway, Arkansas, picking boys from all over the state. But I shared with them that for many years, they voted on the football team which black player would wear my number, which was 44. And I said, I don't know if they're doing it anymore. I have no idea. But so when we got to the Q&A with these 800 young men, he'd raised his hand and said, General, I don't have a question. I just want everybody to know I'm from Fayetteville High School. And 54 years later, since you graduated, we still vote on which black player will wear your number. What you're doing here, no. What you're doing here, and what you're all about with this diversity and inclusion, vulnerability, resilience, bicycles to airplanes, is so important right now because, as you well know, we're not moving forward fast enough yet in all of these areas. And it's not going to be the federal government, it's not going to be the state government, it's not going to be anybody but us that's going to change this. It's not going to be anybody but us to stand up to this, to discuss these issues, to talk about it, and then to do something about it by our behavior and the character of our deeds. The character of our deeds to do what is right. Many years ago, my wife and I were asked to come to a reunion at Fayetteville High, and we were living in New York. I was there for 9/11. That's another story, maybe a Q&A, but I was at the Intrepid Sea Air Space Museum on 9/11, and Mueller had just taken over the FBI, and we invited the FBI, and there were 750 agents in 48 hours living on the Intrepid investigating the attack on America. It's another story, maybe a Q&A. But we went back for this reunion, and what I didn't know was a setup. One athlete who was a city policeman in my hometown was there, and he had diabetes and both legs amputated at the knee. And he came in, it was all a setup. My wife and I didn't know it. I was signing diapers and all kinds of things from grandkids and all that at a cocktail reception. And it wasn't just my class. They said, you don't understand, General, it's not your class, which is 1964. The class of 65 and 66 won't have their reunion unless they can have it with your class, and they want you there to thank you for all what you did on racial integration and leadership, because we become better parents, better lovers, better spouses, now better grandparents because of the examples that you've provided us. So at this moment in the cocktail hour, in comes my friend I hadn't seen since high school. Drops his crutches on titanium splints and comes over, tears streaming down his face. I'm seeing him. E.F. Hutton waves part, puts his arms around me and whispers in my ear, Marty, we didn't want to eat there anyway. This is a powerful day for you. Yeah, you're doing little exercises here and sharing things and listening to these people talking about their vulnerability. But they're not up there just flapping their jibs. They're talking about, what are we doing in the next step of getting engaged in all of this? What are we going to do to implement all this? What are we going to do to make this real? How are we going to make a difference here? Action, action. Not talking the talk, walking the walk. And I would submit to you that this isn't serendipity. This is a moment where you have an opportunity to really do some self-reflection here. What can I do to make a difference here? So I was writing, I've gotten notes from all of you. Everybody. It's just profound to me. But so many things that I've written down, but I want to share the takeaways about my philosophy of life in the Marine Corps of 34 and a half years that I started when I was young, coming out of that racial experience. But it's just profound for me. But the first one is seize the day, carpe diem. It's not a bumper sticker. You can't bring back yesterday, you don't know tomorrow, but it's what are you going to do today? For me, it's about life and death on the battlefield. On the 72nd birthday, when I got emotional with my kids, I said I never thought I'd make it past 19 in Vietnam. Don't know how I did that. I believe it's because of my faith in a supreme being. I had no control over that. My buddies were dying in my arms. And for some reason, I was preserved. What do I do with the gift of life? Seize the day is a powerful thing in my life. The second one, Val Toth said it, our nurse, medical, is bloom where you're planted. You're here. You're not someplace else. Bloom here at Ohio Health. Be the leader you can be. Mentor somebody. Don't think about the promotion so much. Don't think about if I don't do this, I'm not going to get recognized or all that yada, 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 hoo-yah. Think about blooming here to really make a difference because I'm living by my example of the character of my deeds. Do I make mistakes? Yes. From a Judeo-Christian perspective, do I commit sin? Yes. From a non-believer perspective, am I doing the right thing? Probably not. But at the same time, you're trying to make a difference and trying to change your behavior to say you're sorry, as we heard the one executive say. And be fearless in saying you're sorry. And be legitimate when you say that you're sorry. The third is subordinate yourself to the task at hand. No one here is bigger than Ohio Health. It's a huge organization, and in my case, for sure, no one was ever bigger than the United States Marine Corps. We were all part of some bizarre team that was formed for one reason, to fight and win the nation's battles, to go into harm's way to preserve your way of life. Selfless service beyond what someone can imagine when our core values are honor, courage, and commitment. Honor, courage, and commitment, all about life and death. You're dealing with life and death in the medical profession, but ours, it was someone trying to take your life. And how do you deal with someone taking your life and still be above it all in regards to the character of your deeds? And finally, which resonates through this entire, it's seize off of each other's strengths rather than attack each other's weaknesses. And it's said a different way, but it's been the theme throughout. Everything that's been expressed here today says the same thing in a different way, but it's our rabbi this morning, the pillow story. It's my language. Started when I was 19 in combat. In my presence, you'll never say anything untoward about another Marine. about the zit on the end of their nose, how they part their hair. There'll be no Polish jokes here of how many Polacks does it take to change a light bulb, or no jokes about blacks, because this is life and death. There's no joke here. So we have to have what? Trust, trust, trust. Intrinsic trust that I know, and why I love Dave Blum, unabashed about it. Told that to him when I got out of the car last time. Harm's way with him. Tomorrow he's going to give his life for me. And he knows intuitively I'm going to give my life for him. You don't break that bond. You don't break that bond. That's what makes it so unique. And so that became Steele's rule number one. Started at 19, still had it when I was a chief operating officer of the greatest warfighting organization on the planet, the United States Marine Corps. In my presence, you would never say anything untoward about another Marine. Or when I was in joint jobs, another soldier, sailor, airman. Yes, in private, you got to correct. You got to fix people. You got to get them, but you don't do it publicly. You don't demean anyone. You're a leader. You're a leader, not someone who embarrasses someone. And you provide tools, toolkits, methodologies to help them in regards to what they can do to improve. And you're on the journey with them. Constantly as a mentor, constantly involved in changing it all for them. At 72, the oldest guy in the room, one of my business partners is a psychologist out in California, and we came up with this about your generation, but really the generation of your children in regards to what we bequeath to you, and I'd like to share that quickly. And we think you have to have 4 qualities which are, again, resonating throughout all of your things you've been doing in OLBs here. That is judgment to know what's the difference between right and wrong, the integrity to do what is right, even when it's difficult, the character to be able to stand up and speak your voice when it's necessary about doing the right thing, and most of all, the courage to stop those who don't want to do what's right. JIC, judgment, integrity, character, and courage. These are action words. They're not thinking words. They're doing it, making it happen, making it happen. Many of you have read Patrick Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. There's a few, but as you know, those of you who read the book, I'd encourage all of you to read it. I got it in my briefcase. I was going to bring it up here. It's a little red book, but it really speaks about what you're doing here. The first number 1 dysfunction is the absence of trust. The second is the fear of conflict, that without trust, you're unable to engage in honest and passionate debate of ideas. The third is the lack of commitment. Since you don't have trust, since you fear conflict, you can't make a commitment about anything, so prevents all group members from bringing and producing what decisions are made by the leadership. You just won't make the commitment to do that. The fourth is avoidance of accountability. You can't call anybody out because of all the other 3 things along the way that are dysfunctional. And then most of all, which I've talked to Dave about quite a bit and a few of the leaders here, it's inattention to results. Inattention to results. And that is, you put your needs, your personal needs, your ego in front of everything else, and you don't count. Metrics count. You can't measure what you're doing unless you count. 67%. Is that the number I remember? 67% instead of 81%. You got to be striving to get above 67% in this thing. That's a nice number, but it's not the number. You got to count. You got to measure. Some of you are resistant to counting. You don't like counting. You don't like accountability. But my life is about, you got to count. If you can't measure what you're doing successfully, you don't know what to do to fix that. And you're in deep trouble for that. Closing, before the Q&A. Why? What's me? Who's Myers-Briggs? Anybody Myers-Briggs here? A few more. Not enough, but the Marine Corps adopted Myers-Briggs in 1981 because Nixon ended the draft. And Myers-Briggs, which those of you who don't know, I apologize, I'm not going to give you the lecture on that, but I'm a school-trained Myers-Briggs person from Jump Street when we started it. And it's knowing yourself and knowing different 16 personality types, not a panacea, it's a zip code, but I'm an INFP. And we're the smallest population of anybody in Western culture. In the Marine Corps, you can count them all on both hands. We just don't have INFPs, particularly as general officers. They're not out there. We're opposite, ESTJs. Decisions, speak before you've even thought what the heck you're going to say. Because you're in charge here, so you got to say, I'm in charge here, and this is what we're going to do. Well, INFPs aren't like that. But I had a man, when I came back and was teaching combat leadership at Officer Candidate School at Quantico, turned down an appointment to the Naval Academy and married my girlfriend, who was my wife, and he came into my life, and his name was Carl G. Taylor. And I want to end my remarks for open the Q&A to tell you why I'm here today. Carl Taylor was about 6'3", 225. He was an infantry staff non-commissioned officer. He was just cut like a piece of granite. He had a speech impediment. I thought he was born with a cleft palate, but not. I learned later that he pulled a dog off his younger brother. Who was attacking his younger brother, and the dog turned on him and just crushed his face, zipper lips, and he thought with a lisp. But he was like listening to Moses. I mean, the guy was profound. And he put his arm around me for mentorship. He chastised me. What are you doing? What are you trying to do with your life? Hell, I didn't know. I was 19 years old just trying to figure out why I was alive from Vietnam. And he would walk in the woods with me at Quantico, Virginia, and just inspired me. I took a test, college-level examination program test, and passed it, which was a college equivalency. I'd had one semester of college before I enlisted in the Marine Corps. So it speaks volumes about Arkansas education, which gets much maligned. But anyway, passed the test and went into Officer Candidate School. We have a tradition of a salute, passing a silver dollar from the junior person to the senior one to recognize your new position of authority. And for me, it was with my mentor, Carl G. Taylor. And when he saluted and verbal greeting, good morning, Lieutenant, he said, good morning, Lieutenant. Good morning, Staff Sergeant Taylor. Do you have any last-minute instructions? And handed him the silver dollar, and he looked at me dead in the eye and said, Lieutenant, do your duty. Then he smartly saluted again, did an about face, and walked away and never saw him, and this is his story. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, while serving as a company gunnery sergeant during Operation Meade River in the Republic of Vietnam on the night of 8 December 1968. Informed that the commander of the lead platoon had been mortally wounded when his unit was pinned down by a heavy volume of enemy fire, Staff Sergeant Taylor, along with another Marine, crawled forward to the beleaguered unit through a hail of hostile fire, shouted encouragement and instructions to the men, and deployed them to covered positions. With his companion, he then repeatedly maneuvered across an open area to rescue those Marines who were too seriously wounded to move by themselves. Upon learning that there were still other seriously wounded men lying in another open area in proximity to an enemy machine gun position, Staff Sergeant Taylor, accompanied by 4 comrades, led his men forward across the fire-swept terrain in an attempt to rescue the Marines. When his group was halted by devastating fire, he directed his companions to return to the company command post, whereupon he took his grenade launcher and, in full view of the enemy, firing his weapon as he ran, charged across the open rice paddy towards the machine gun position. Although wounded several times, he succeeded in reaching the machine gun bunker and silencing the fire from that sector moments before he was mortally wounded. Directly instrumental in saving the lives of several of his fellow Marines, Staff Sergeant Taylor, by his indomitable courage, inspiring leadership, and selfless dedication, upheld the highest traditions of the Marine Corps and of the United States Naval Service, and the President of the United States, in the name of the Congress, takes pride in presenting the Medal of Honor posthumously to Staff Sergeant Carl G. Taylor, United States Marine Corps, signed Richard Nixon. This is my hero. INFPs have to have a hero in their life, living or dead. It's great, in my case, that mine's dead. He can do no wrong. He's the last conscious thought I have every night, even when I'm privileged to be in bed with my beautiful wife of 51 and a half years. I'm talking to him every night. Watermelon. I'm talking to him every night. He's the first conscious thought I have every morning when I wake up. I'm talking to him about when Dave Blum, Jane Ely invited me up here about coming here. I'm talking to him about everything I've studied about Ohio Health and what you're trying to do here. And it all comes back to that same thing. Lieutenant, do your duty. It's time for you all to take it to the next level. Not think about your duty, but do your duty. And as leaders of this great organization, top 100, all these statistical numbers that you have, take it to another level where you are untouchable. As I say in the Marine Corps, unassailable to any outside criticism. Unassailable. Because you all get it. You all live it, and you all do it. Recently, I was privileged to be at Quantico to dedicate a building that houses all enlisted Marines that train the future leaders of our Marine Corps at Officer Candidate School, where he and I met. It's an $18 million building. When I was there with my family, all of my family came. The company commander who watched him run across the rice paddy was there, paralyzed just a few weeks later when shot in the back by the enemy and confined to a wheelchair, paralyzed from the waist down. The comrades he sent back to the company command post were all there. All of their children, male or female, were either named Carl or Carla in this man's honor. They were all present. He preserved their life. They're beholding to him for preserving their life. When I got through with my remarks, I was crying. They were crying. I asked the company commander, did I do him honor? And they said, General, you nailed it. He was the greatest man they ever knew. He was the greatest man I ever knew. He got what this is all about. He paid the supreme sacrifice for it, but he really understood what selfless service is all about and what it was his responsibility at that moment in time on 8 December 1968 to do everything he could to preserve your way of life. Let's take it to another level. God bless you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So we have set up microphones, as I mentioned. We've got 3 of them for people to line up and ask questions of the general. I'm sure that if you're like me, you're just trying to wrap your head around everything you just heard. But I'm sure he even alluded to some stories that he would share if you had questions about any of his military career, about his personal life. So I know this is not a shy crowd, and we have 3 microphones, and I'm hoping some people are going to walk up, and Kiana's going to start us off, and you guys can start lining up, and we'll get to as many as we can. And General Steele, will let you start here.
Hi, General Steele. So first of all, thank you so much. I had the pleasure of hearing you speak last year at the lunch, and you went into a lot of detail a little bit today, kind of about the high school experience. And so I'd love for you to kind of give us some insight on how to move people through when people are uncomfortable. So a lot of the topics that you're talking about our diversity and inclusion journey sometimes is uncomfortable. So how do you move people when it's uncomfortable?
Yep. Well, just as Dave said, he didn't say so much about it this time, but he did in May when you had OLB. It is very uncomfortable. In our case, in the high school experience, it was kind of us against the world. And everybody in our community, our religious leaders, our teachers and coaches, public and parochial schools, everybody got what we were taking on. And everybody knew what we as youth were going through. Some were still bigots and the residual effects they had, but they were obeying the law of Brown versus Board of Education, and they had bought in to the community effort. So in school, what would you expect? The problem is those children who were offspring of parents who were still residually holding on to their bigotry and knew it was wrong intuitively, knew it was something that they were on the wrong side of history because we were just starting even at that early on in the process. This wasn't going to go away. And what we were able to do through sports primarily and through our leaders in school and coaches, et cetera, is kind of bond together to say, this is what we have to do. This is how we have to stand up to all this. And then when the question came, when it became so difficult where your life is being threatened, what we did to offset our life being threatened as white guys, if you will, sports weren't for women back then, unfortunately, but that's come along later. But white guys, our bond was, it wasn't about us. It was about our African-American black athletes. And what we had to do was step up to protect them and have them come out to be themselves and not only, which they did, trust us, but believe that we were going to be there for them and have their back through all of these processes. And so today, I still talk to, one guy's a pharmacist in Springfield, Missouri, doctors, lawyers. I'm going back to Arkansas to, unfortunately, for the Alabama football game where we'll get smoked by 5 touchdowns in Arkansas. But I'll go back and speak to students then, and they're still working through that. So in 1963, that's 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And we're still hanging people by the neck until dead if they show up in a town after sundown. So we really had to bond together and navigate all that. So there was violence, I have to admit to that. We took it on so big. We had some tough guys on a football team that, said, let's go clean them out. Let's go up there, change in the back of the car. And we had to keep from doing that because although the law in Fayetteville was on our side, the law in the other towns was not on our side. So we were able to navigate it because we bonded together, and with the one simple thing, it was not about us, it was about the cause. And it was about the process that we were a part of history to make a difference by doing the right thing no matter what the sacrifice was and what the challenge was. And if we could always think of that and respond to that, then we too would be unassailable. So that's what we did. Yeah. Anybody else?
Other questions? I can't believe there's 1,300 people in the room.
Yes, I have one. With your degree in history and your look at history, what made Fayetteville, this island, surrounded by all these towns, be different that then you took up that cause?
It's a great question. First of all, the University of Arkansas, which is kind of the intellectual center of the state, and then the geography of it in the northwest portion of the state, almost bordering on Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma. But the fundamental was the diversity that existed at the University of Arkansas. So our classmates were children of Jewish professors, for example, and we were way ahead of our time, way ahead of our time. I mean, LGBT, all of that was happening, and we were aware of it at that time. I mean, I was just in Arkansas, very close friends of mine, a girl I went from first grade all the way through college with, their 50th wedding anniversary. Her husband was an athlete in school just 2 weeks ago. And, you know, part of our closest friends were lesbians that are still together today, and they were at the party, and we were talking about this, the same thing, and it was all kind of, it was the educational environment, the understanding, the openness, the diversity that we just kind of got, that we were ahead of the game and ahead of time and really understood it, and were so respectful of it. But mostly it was because we talked about it, and our leaders talked about it, and our coaches talked about it. And they would, you know, they would tell us, you know, what we're going to face. And so, you know, when you're dealing with the child of a physics professor who's Jewish, Arkansas is 2% Catholic, as an example. You know, definite minority in the state of Arkansas. It's primarily Southern Baptist. So I was prejudiced against. Every time something happened, someone would say, must be that Catholic boy, Marty Steele, doing it. So we all understood all that, and it was about, wait a minute, let's just get this right and communicate with it and what we need to do. But I think that the combination of the university, the combination of understanding we were on the right side of history, and the ability to be able to communicate and then, most importantly, listen and then act is what separated us from the neighboring towns. I mean, the residual, it's not over. It's not over. It's still resident there, still resident. Somebody go ahead.
General Steele, thank you for your great thoughts. And you describe a lot about your road to character and how that came through being in the military and having the experience of being in different parts of the world. The generations that are now going through our organization, the millennials, the Generation X, how do we help them go through their road to character where they develop in a way that maybe you did, but don't have the same forces that you experienced?
Yep. It's a great question. I wish my son were here. Again, he's 46 years old, colonel in the Marine Corps, and then for the birthday Saturday, we got a loan for an hour over a refreshing drink, and that's what we were talking about, what you just asked. So he's leading Gen X's and millennials right now, okay? And his statement to me was, Dad, what you dealt with, which he obviously lived through as being a child of mine and my wife's, he said, we don't have these issues. We don't have these issues. And they're all out there. He said, I've got transgenders in my unit. I've got lesbians in my unit. I've got gay people in my unit. My unit doesn't function without them. And so African Americans, we have none of these issues that you had to live through because the Marine Corps, you know, was the last to integrate in the services. A lot of the leadership of the Marine Corps was, for example, was Southern gentlemen who were racist. And so my period of time was changing the culture of all of that. Don't ask, don't tell, President Clinton. I've known Clinton since high school. He's my age. We went to Boy State together. He promoted me in the Oval Office of the White House. You know, I told him that don't ask, don't tell. That's a fatally flawed policy about gays in the military. The best people I had in my unit were gay. And the problem was, if it was found out that they did something that was gay, we had zero tolerance. We had to kick them out of the Marine Corps. And I said, this is just hypocrisy. It's just wrong. And what you're telling people, don't ask, don't tell, they're coming in under a fraud. It's a fraud. It's a lie. We've got to change all this. Yes, there'll be pushback. Yes, there'll be bigots. Yes, there are homophobes. All of these people exist in society, but we've got to do the right thing and move these social issues forward and be the model to emulate with all of it. So my son, I said, David, I'm going to say this to the crowd if it comes up in a question. He said, Dad, you've got to tell all these people that for the military as a model, and we've got our faults, These aren't issues for that generation. All they want is good, sound leadership. They want to be treated with equality and dignity and respect, and understand that we know that without them, we don't function. My son, again, helicopter pilot. He was a squadron commander, and one of his electronics people was a gay Marine. And he said, Dad, if I don't have that guy in my unit, these planes fall out of the sky. I mean, it's not rocket science to me. And so there's no issue there, and that, yes, you forged this base, if you will, but where we are right now is I want to get them to understand in the next step of their responsibilities to mentor, where they say, these aren't social issues for us, we accept this now. We don't cringe. Do we have some residual effects? Yes, because they're children of bigots, for example, or homophobes, what I said earlier. But on the whole, these aren't major issues. So what I think in the answer to you all now in this is that they're more resilient than you think. You just got to be much more open in the dialogue and narrative. Those cards you held up, you know what I'm talking about? Everybody know what I'm talking about? I mean, you all need to read those every darn day. You need to read those cards every day. I'd wake up in the morning and I have a mini copy of those cards on the bathroom mirror. Just as a reminder, this is the world, this is what I'm a part of, this is what I'm a leader in, and what can I do to make this person comfortable in this environment? What am I doing to get them promoted? What am I doing to make sure that we're better today than we were yesterday, and we're better tomorrow than we are today because we get it. So it's communication, leadership, and leadership by example. I'll tell you, when we're talking about what's the biggest, for me, regret. Nobody's asked that question yet. I thought I'd get it number one. But, my issue for me was and is, and I'm getting through it because of my son, is women in the infantry. Women in the infantry. We have our first woman infantry officer in the United States Marine Corps. She's training right now as an infantry platoon commander, has 42 male Marines under her. She's in Australia, in Darwin, Australia, training. Magnificent. I'm an armor officer. Tanks. Israelis tried to put women in tanks. Failed. The gender inside that four-man crew, a woman in there, it just didn't work because of just the biology, if you will. Because when you get in combat, you're defecating and urinating and all that. It's just a mess in there. So for me, my generation opened the door. Please get in. How are you today? You do that in New York City right now in the elevator and you stand by to let a woman in, they're going to punch you in the face. You were here first, get on the elevator, numbnuts. So when we went to, my son was at the basic school at Quantico training officers, and he would share with me, Dad, we're going to have a woman we're not changing the standards. We're never reducing the standards, and we'll have a woman that will meet the standards. And we've got to have her in the infantry to do that because we got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And now we do. We've had several try and fail, but my view is, and he said to me, Dad, there'll be many more, and they're great leaders. He said, I told you this before, I'm going to tell you again. My son's had 3 tours of combat in Afghanistan. The best pilot that he flew with in Cobras, attack helicopters, was a woman. And he said everybody wanted to fly with her because she was better than everybody else. So they're through all that now. I know I'm going on too long about your question, but to me, it's for that generation, we're so far beyond it right now, and I'm thrilled about it. And I've gotten over it. Big thing, hugging my son, and I said, I hope I get to meet both of them, the armor lieutenant and the infantry officer, and then see many more come in because I'm not going to open the door for them. No, I'm just kidding.
General, we got time for 2 more questions. Shannon and then Nate.
Hi, General. Thanks for your comments today. I'm wondering a little bit about some specific strategies focusing on disrupting the drift. So when you get into conversations where you're not headed in the right direction from a diversity and inclusion perspective, what can you do in an environment, corporate hospital environment to, in a respectful way, disrupt that drift?
Yep. So again, I'd recommend the 5 dysfunctions of a team. Disrupting the drift is a major portion of that book because it's a safe place to go to get off track. You know, people want to go there as part of not making a commitment and all that. My view and my experience in doing that as a leader and a consultant for companies throughout the country is take a pause, and I've got the words specifically written down. What's happening here now? What's happening here now? Just ask the question to the group, what's happening here now? And someone's going to have the courage after what you're all doing here, say, this is what's happening here. And they're going to say, we're drifting. And then, not to embarrass the person in front of us, I agree. Anybody else agree? Are we drifting? Yes, we are. What do we have to do to get back on track? And the person who wants to drift, all you're doing with them is just saying, start listening. Just listen. Let's get this back on track to where we're going here. And then my recommendation is that you will get it back, your comment is you'll get it back on track. And then what I would recommend, again, because of my style of leadership, when the event is over, I'd get the drifter in a private conversation. Not to chastise them necessarily, but to say, what were you doing and why were you doing it? And what are you going to do the next time? Why were you doing what you're doing? And sometimes you'll get a bunch of baloney that will be poo-poo, you know. I mean, it's just, and sometimes you'll get a true assessment of, I'm uncomfortable with the subject matter, or I'm not prepared, or all these kinds of things. But that's what I would recommend. Just say, what's happening here now? And someone have the courage to say, we're drifting. And if they don't, then my assessment as the leader of the team would be, my sense is we're drifting off task here, and we've got to get it back on task. Does that help?
Nate?
General, you've been on the receiving end of a lot of hate, which I can imagine can lead to anger. And it feels like if you give into that anger, it widens the divide instead of bridging it. So I'm curious how you would coach all of us to avoid going to anger when we're on the receiving end of hate.
Yeah, great question. Great question. Well, let me just go back to lived experience again. Wouldn't work. You know, we had to do it through the sport. First of all, I mean, that sounds trite, but we're not going to get angry at you. We're just going to beat the hell out of you, you know. But we're not going to get angry about it because you've got a problem. It's your problem, not my problem. I'm not going to take your problem on and become angry with your problem. So most of my life about all this was deflecting it and not choosing to be angry. I mean, you make your own choices here. I mean, it's your choice. If you choose to be angry, it's ego. You know, your ego's taken over, and it gets out of cattywampus, and you become part of the problem. It's that old adage about pigs in a pigsty. I mean, you're jumping in there with the pig in the pigsty, and the pig loves that you're in there with him. And so I've just always found it's not a place to go. You don't need to get angry. I don't want to say that you're mamby-pamby and you're above it, but at the same time I want to say it just doesn't do any good, particularly in a public forum, because all you're doing is showing that you really don't have not only control of the situation, but you don't have control of yourself. And so I just don't look at anger as a part of the solution. It's more problematic. So it takes a lot of self-reflection. Again, I'm a big Myers-Briggs person. I know doctors in the room here, psychologists, psychiatrists, may have different views about it, but we had to do something in the institution of the Marine Corps because it was no draft, and these were all volunteers. We had to know where they were coming from, what were they thinking, and we couldn't just say, do it because I told you to do it. We had to know what was going on inside their heads, and so part of our challenge was when they were looking at you like you had 6 heads, you couldn't get angry with them. You know, you had to give the rationale, slow down, make the process, and have them come to grips with it. I think that the summary of it all is that if I were a predictor of the future, watermelon, a predictor of the future, we've got a long way to go. We've got a long way to go. You're just a part of this journey, just like I was. It's what do you do with the time that you have the opportunity to be leaders in the journey. But, you know, people will be talking about what we're talking about today 50 years from now. I mean, this is not, there's no end state here. This is a marathon, and we all have to make a commitment to the marathon to be successful. And anger, all it's going to do is drag you down.
So, a funny story.
Yeah.
One night, Martin and I were at dinner, and we were talking about the meeting, and obviously there's always a lot of stuff to talk about. And I said, you know, by God, that's how I feel about that. He said, of course you do, because you're an ISTJ. And I looked at him and said, how the hell did you know what I was? He is a student of this, and he just nailed me right there.
Yeah. And he is an ISTJ.
Yeah, I know. So Marty, it was a gift having you here today.
Yeah.
I know everyone here really appreciates it. We all learned a lot, opened our eyes. You've done a lot for the country, so thank you very much for all that.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm not done with you yet. So, the next topic we're going to get into is about values. I heard you mention the Marine Corps values twice today.
Yeah.
We've got 4 values. We've had them for 20 years. Keith Vesper helped lead us through that process 20 years ago. And our values are compassion, integrity, excellence, and stewardship. And I still remember it was like yesterday because we had a meeting like this and we rolled out the values, and the one I had to talk about was compassion. And I still remember what I said. It's like it's walking in somebody else's shoes. So the issue of values is what I want to reflect on just for a minute with you.
Yep.
What do those values mean to the Marine Corps? What is the value of having values, and what did that mean to the Marine Corps?
Yeah.
And the corollary is with us, what do values mean to us?
Yeah. Well, I mean, all the Marines in the room, or even sister services or military, but I mentioned them briefly. Our core values are honor, courage, and commitment. And they're the bedrock of who we are as individuals and who we are as an institution. And I was taking some notes about them just to tell you what it really does mean to all Marines, because once a Marine, always a Marine. You're never not a Marine, and even when your active duty days are over. But honor is the bedrock of our character. Do we have people that are dishonorable and act dishonorably? Absolutely, because we're human beings. And what we try to do, of course, is hold them accountable. Do we make mistakes? We never lie, cheat, or steal. Do we have people that lie, cheat, and steal? Of course we do, because it's the human nature in us to lie, cheat, and steal in our weaker moments. So we have that. But honor is the bedrock. It empowers Marines to exemplify the ultimate in ethical and moral behavior, abiding by an uncompromising code of integrity to respect human dignity and have respect and concern for each other, particularly, as I said throughout, in harm's way. I'll give my life for him, and I'll give my life for Steve, and I know they'll do the same for me. Second is courage. Whereas honor is the bedrock, courage is the heart of our core values. The mental, moral, and physical strength ingrained in each Marine that sees us through the challenges of combat and the mastery of fear, which we haven't talked about fear, by the way, but it's implied in everything that's been said here. Do what is right, adhere to the higher standard of personal conduct. And I like this, and I've said it often, and I didn't say it today, but I look at courage as, and I just take a note of this, what you do in the dark. Think about what I just said. What you do in the dark. Third, commitment. A spirit of determination and dedication within members of the force of arms instills dedication to the Corps and the country 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It establishes the value of the Marine Corps as a warrior and a citizen that others strive to emulate, because it's our reason for being in our society. In the case of the Marine Corps, the common thread of our threat is, do we need a Marine Corps? Do we need a United States Marine Corps in the nation? And our great leaders throughout time, many of whom I knew, some passed away, some are still alive, but the answer is no. But the nation wants a Marine Corps because of these three core values: to aspire to emulate honor, courage, and commitment. And as long as we exemplify those values and serve as the model for the nation will want a Marine Corps. And so that's why each of us, when we're privileged to wear the uniform, it is all about what am I doing when I have the privilege to wear it to ensure honor, courage, and commitment is maintained while I'm wearing the uniform.
Thank you.
Yep.
So values. We've had these four for 20 years. They've guided us. We recognize to them. We celebrate with them. We evaluate against them. We judge our behavior according to them. And given our focus on diversity and inclusion, we've had a thought. Maybe we could amend them given that notion. With that, I'll turn it over to Steve.
Thank you.